Thanks for listening to the Nice Podcast. I am available to deliver keynote presentations and workshops for your company or for your conference. Reach out to me, davedelaney.speaks.com, or email me and we can talk. Now on with the show.
Trust comes from vulnerability, and it's a tougher thing to do when you're the leader, when you are imagining that your career is on the line and you show weakness, or weakness at least, you show vulnerability. And I think that ability to tap into your own humanity, people will feel.
Nice.
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 Nice. Nice.
Nice.
Nice.
Nice with Dave Delaney.
Welcome to the Nice Podcast about communication, collaboration, and becoming better leaders. I'm your host, Dave Delaney from Futureforth.com, where we help fast-growing technology companies retain talent and improve culture so you have happier, more connected teams. There's a bonus of being a Canadian living in the U.S. I get 2 Thanksgivings. That's 2 big reminders each year to be thankful for the great people in my life. And one Thanksgiving's in October and one is in November. That's also a lot of overeating, but I digress. Part of my NICE method training at Futureforth for leaders of fast-growing tech companies is the practice of being grateful. The Oxford Dictionary defines the word grateful as showing an appreciation of kindness. But being thankful is a feeling, and being grateful is an action. Now, there's nothing wrong with being thankful. It's a powerful practice that we should be doing every day. And being grateful can take you a step further. So I recommend that you pause. Not the podcast. Keep listening. But maybe afterwards, write down what you're thankful for. In fact, I encourage you to do this every day. And then consider one action that you can take to express how grateful you are. If you watched my ROI of NICE on-demand webcast, which is available for free at Futureforth.com, you'll already be familiar with this technique of sending thank you cards. You can watch that, by the way, on demand at the link in the show notes today. So today I'm speaking with Minter Dial, who will share great ideas and his perspectives about recognizing your team members. We talk about leadership and repetition and hugs. Yes, the power of hugs. We talk about conversations, company retreats, empathy in the workplace, curiosity, and how this all helps to build stronger brands. You're really going to love our conversation right after this.
Content marketing, SEO, competitive research, advertising. Sounds like a large scope of work you need to get done. How about full digital marketing control over your business? SEMrush can be your right hand for that. It has over 50 tools and reports to cover any online marketing activities. No more switching from one service to another. Get a 14-day free trial and watch your business grow. Go to bit.ly/SEMrushMPN. That's bit.ly/SEMrushMPN.
Welcome to the Nice Podcast about communication, collaboration, and becoming better leaders. I'm your host, Dave Delaney from Futureforth.com, where we help grow technology companies, help them retain their talent and improve their culture. But enough about me. Today, I'm chatting with Minter Dial, an international professional speaker, an elevator, and a multiple award-winning author. Minter is an agent of change who has exercised 12 different métiers and moved country 15 times. He's the author of World War II Story, The Last Ring Home, as well as 3 business books, Futureproof, Heartificial Empathy, and You Lead. Welcome to the show, Minter.
Dave, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on. I love the fact that you know how to pronounce metier, being a true Canadian.
Yes, my French sadly is a little weathered. So tell me about that. So you've traveled. Which countries have you lived in? I know you've lived in Canada. I know we're talking, and you are in London right now. So what are the countries? Where have you lived?
So I was born in Belgium, raised in France, educated in England. With American parents, married to a French-Spanish lady. I spent in Cumul about 2 years of my life in Spain, but not living there. Just I would spend a month at a time. And then I spent a considerable amount of time in Switzerland as well. And of course, I lived in the United States over 2 different periods of my life, roughly 12 years. So Western Europe, North America, that's basically the extent of it, nothing exotic.
Nothing. Well, for many people here, I mean, I know plenty of people who haven't left the great state of depending on what month we talk about. Yes, depending on what day it is, I suppose.
Definitely not my problem. The number of passports I've actually run through because I didn't have any more pages left to have stamps.
Yes,
I've definitely travel is encrusted into my DNA.
So if nobody's listening to the show, let's hope we have listeners. But if nobody's listening to the show, where would you live right now, anywhere in the world?
Well, I've been lucky enough to choose that. And I live in London, which is where I really love to live. I feel like it's a vibrant city, that it's close enough to lots of different places. It's a truly international place where every dinner party I will have 3 or 4 different languages at the dinner. Going around in the streets, I'm constantly marveling at the diversity of the people. And I also think that for its size, it's a tremendously civilized place to live.
Yeah, London is magical. My mom, my mom is from London. And I lived there for a number of months, and I used to frequent Speaker's Corner because of just how I marveled at it. And have you ever been?
I have once.
Once? Okay. What did you think?
Well, I mean, I think that there's a tradition of speaking in this country.
Yes.
Which is absolutely marvelous. And then the notion of debate and on balance, I qualify it because there's always, shit everywhere, but we do have a gift of the gab, and the outside of the Georgians from Tbilisi, if you will, the English speeches at weddings are absolutely bar none the best.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, one of the things I loved about Speaker's Corner is just, I mean, I was quite young back then, but it was just, and for those of you not familiar listening, Speaker's Corner, at least I haven't checked recently, but last I checked, it had been running for hundreds of years in Hyde Park, right at Marble Arch Tube Stop in London every Sunday, where people could go and gather in the park. You could bring a little stepladder or your own literal soapbox, stand up and pontificate whatever the heck you wanted to share. And as you do this, crowds gather to listen to what you have to say. There's no costs involved or anything like that. And you just peruse from one speaker to the next. And when you feel like you have something to say, you can heckle those speakers in a polite, playful way, and debate them as well. And it gets to be quite colorful, and strangely, in a lot of places, people would end up getting punched or shot. But in London, this has always been something, at least in my experience, something really magical, where people are open for the most part of what you have to say.
Something I've been working on a lot and recently is the notion of conversation. And I might well be tainted by the fact that we have a parliament here in England or in Britain, where we do converse. We have live debate and plenty of heckling going on in the parliament, where we really do talk and debate, and it's done live. And I think that culture of being able to debate, albeit a lot of talking over and heckling and speaking and not really, being very polite necessarily, I do feel like one of the biggest things we need in our lives, Dave, is ability to have meaningful conversations. And it's something that's maybe my latest obsession, is how to in with strangers, with friends, at work, how do we have more meaningful conversations?
Absolutely. I had a conversation on this podcast with Robin Dunbar, also from England, from Liverpool. He's the professor who came up with Dunbar's number. And his most recent book is about friendship. It's definitely well worth a read. It's excellent. And the conversation, I will add, is actually worth listening to too. I really loved having him on this show.
I will check it out.
Yeah. So what's the nicest thing someone has done for you recently?
Well, wow.
It can be small. It can be big.
Yeah, sure. I'm just sort of looking through the experiences I've had. Okay, so I've got something that's kind of pretty marvelous. I flew to Los Angeles about 3 weeks ago. It was Halloween, so I'm dating myself at this point, time dating. And I went to see my favorite band called Dead & Co., the offshoot of the Grateful Dead. And I had an extra ticket. And I had to sell my ticket, which I had paid for $350 for. And at a Dead show, you can imagine people don't want to spend that much money. Anyway, I finally saw this man who was maybe 70-year-old, and he said, "How much do you want?" And I said, "Well, listen, I paid $350." He says, "Well, I got 50." I said, "Well, I really 100 is that's the face value is 100." He says, "Yeah, man, I got 50." He said, "How about if I throw in a hug?"
That's a tough one.
There we went. That's how the ticket got sold.
Interesting. So it was the old hug upsell.
That's it.
Yeah. Hard to turn him down at that point, I would imagine.
No doubt.
I ran into a situation years ago where it was very last minute. So Gordon Lightfoot, who I expect, having spent some time in Canada, you would be familiar with. But
of course.
Yeah, Gordy's, and if you like music, period. In fact, I think the Grateful Dead might have covered one of his songs. But Gordy, I went to go see Gordon Lightfoot in Nashville, and it was very last minute. And I was down near where he was playing. So I thought, I've got some time tonight. I might as well go see him. And I've seen him play many times. And I went in, and it was about $150 a ticket. And I thought, I've seen him a bunch, and I didn't have $150 on me. And I was like, yeah, that's just too much. Never mind. And I walked out, and a guy was trying to sell his ticket. And so, he came down to $25, or I talked him down to $20 because that's all I had. And he said, and the show is just about to begin, and he's like, "Fine, here." And he sold it to me. And as I reached in my pocket, I only had $16. I felt like such a jerk.
Oh no.
Yeah. And he was already really frustrated with me. So he sold me the ticket, very upset for $16. And I went in and I bought a beer with my credit card, which was like, a $10 beer. And then I sat down, and guess who I was sitting next to with this $10 beer in my hand? The same guy that I just bought the ticket from.
I guess you could have bought him a beer.
And that is exactly what I did, actually. I went and bought him a beer. So I felt so badly because he's looking at the beer like, wait, that's $10, you jerk.
Right.
Yeah.
So the Dead covered Early Morning Rain.
There you go. I knew they would have. Or so you're obviously a big Dead fan, are you?
I am. I've seen them a couple of hundred times. So
nice.
I think I qualify.
Are you, do you know David Meerman Scott?
I saw David at the Phil Les show on the 30th of November.
Okay.
The 30th of October, sorry.
Cool. Whenever I think of like prolific Dead fans, then I often think of him.
We unite for sure.
And it's an amazing thing, not to get off topic here, but to talk about the Grateful Dead for a sec, because what they did early on, and I don't know if this was like a marketing ploy or whether it was just like whatever. And I think it was more like a whatever. But they allowed fans to record their shows and then sell and trade those bootleg cassettes for the most part.
Absolutely. Well, they did. I think they did pretty much everything by mistake.
Right.
Or at least, not with a commercial mind or spirit anywhere in their thinking. But the bigger thought was that they didn't like the idea of record labels and studio albums, what they wanted to do was always create the experience and create live shows each time differently. And the fact that you could record them was almost incidental, because the real experience was being there at the time that they played that with somebody.
Right.
And so in the end of the day, that's the big thing, which is they were all about the experience. And that today is really what the best marketing, best brands do, is knowing how to create the experience, that unique moment that you feel special for having attended.
Is there an example of that that comes to mind?
Well, in terms of brands and how they go about it?
Yeah.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I was working with Samsung, and one of the ideas that they had for the launch of a product was to create an event. And so they made a happening. And I mean, many brands have started to do that. But if you can create an experience at a more mundane level in the store such that you feel uniquely serviced, that actually at a much more granular level is what it's about. Feeling like you were special and you had this superior experience, and you come out with this bag or whatever you might have purchased, but it's associated with that experience. And that makes it some sort of eternal and an infinitely more valuable object in your mind, because it's associated with maybe a nostalgia, or anyway, that wonderful emotion of having had that experience at that time with that person who went above the call to make you feel special.
This is why I love speaking at company retreats that are off campus, or doing workshops that are off campus, like outside of the office, because it makes them that much more memorable and makes those experiences that much stronger. And it brings people together more, I find.
Oh, no doubt. Context is so important where you do things. And if the concert, in the case of music, is outdoor and it's raining, that's an experience. Or there's the moon that's shining. And wherever you're doing it, context is so important. So when you do these offsites, you really need to think through how easy it was to get there and or not. And then, are you going to allow people to enjoy the location? So many times, the big mistake I feel is that people have these beautiful locations, but you come in and you barely see the backside of the toilet, much less the swimming pool, the spa, the tennis court, and whatever else might have been available at the site.
I agree. Actually, I remember I used to go to and speak at Blog World back in the day. It used to be called the Podcast New Media Expo back in, I think, 2007. And they moved that conference around over the years, and it kind of ended up in Vegas. And with all due respect to Vegas, but the thing with a city like Vegas is there's so much distraction that it's hard to keep everybody together. And so at a conference, that's why I'm a big fan of conferences that are single track, that are in smaller environments, so that people don't leave. That way they have those commonalities of all sharing the same experiences with speakers, that they can then talk about that as an icebreaker or what have you, in the same conference center or area, rather than getting distracted by all the casinos and shows and such.
When I was running Redken, the hairdresser company, and so this is a story about Las Vegas, and I should give all the credit where it's due to the woman who used to run it, called Christine Schuster. And we used to do one event every year, and then it became every other year, but one event every year at Las Vegas called the Symposium, the Redken Symposium. We had 10,000 people coming. Which is pretty many people in general. And they were all the majority of them were customers coming from 40 or so countries. And we also had our distributor teams as well. But the objective that we had was, despite the fact that it was in that huge environment with ding, 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 ding going on everywhere, was to make it such a unique experience that everyone felt that the experience was for them individually. And that was our objective. And it took 18 months of preparations. and a whole lot of user experience planning. Back in the day, we didn't call it that, but that's really what it came down to. And making everyone feel that they could have a customized journey for 2.5 days, including the feeling part, belonging to this exceptional group, this company. And the funny thing was, if you can imagine this, Dave, we had our customers pay to attend our conference. How many brands do that? And not only did they have to pay, they had to pay for the ticket, they had to pay for the travel, and they also had the opportunity cost of not being at their hairdressing salons for 2.5 days, or some for many more, because they'd come in flying from a lot further away. And so that was a massive investment. And it was the singularly largest event that was held in our industry by a factor of 5. And they paid to come.
That's brilliant. I love that too, because when you have those experiences with brands, that helps you build trust with those brands as well. And as you wrote in You Lead, you said building trust is the critical glue to keep the workflow and outputs effective. And I'm curious, like, what are some effective ways that you've seen or that you share that leaders can earn trust within the workplace itself, like with their colleagues?
Well, I think there's nothing stronger than walking the talk. And so if you say something, you do it. And you are able to roll up your sleeves and show that you are able to do it just as much as or with everybody else at the same level. Trust also, I think, comes from vulnerability. And it's a tougher thing to do when you're the leader, when you are imagining that your career is on the line and you show weakness, or weakness at least, you show vulnerability. And I think that ability to tap into your own humanity, people will feel. But breaking that down, it means being able to say, and not just doing it in a, what's my weakness? Oh, I'm really demanding,
right?
Kind of weakness. It's one of those where I really fucked up, where I really wasn't that good, where I may even cry, and that can do. I mean, you're not going to do it in a manipulative way,
right?
But if you can show that you are not perfect, show it, not necessarily tell it, by the way, then you will help tap into a stronger bond, because people will say, oh, well, he or she is actually a human being, is normal, is like me. And that leads people to want to be with you. Afterwards, you still also want to show the way and inspire you, bring breath into them. And sometimes having that kind of passion also makes people want to trust you and believe in your vision.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the idea of doing that, of actually not coming clean exactly, or perhaps coming clean, but just being open and approachable to your team also. And I think when you share your own failures, that also helps to alleviate the fear that they feel in maybe owning up to their own concerns, rather than, putting the blinders on and just hoping that, it all works out. Meanwhile, everything crashes and burns around them.
I have a couple of anecdotes, stories. One of them was, even though I'm a speaker, I had this moment when I was working at L'Oreal where I completely flubbed my lines. The way we used to do these conferences or presentations was you had to learn perfectly your speech, every word, which followed what, every phrasing in line with each slide. It was all a big cinema. And I just froze. And it was the most embarrassing thing of my life. And pretty much everybody wrote me off. However, there's one individual called Jacques who was delicious enough to come up to me and says, I believe in you. Don't worry about what other people are saying. And for me, that's a sign of leadership. When the chips are down, to come in. I mean, he didn't have to do that. And then the other anecdote is when many years later, I'm in a much higher position, and I'm making a really important speech at a press launch. About 60 people in the room, all la-di-das from all the big press. And so lots of stress related to that. And for some reason, I lost it. I broke down. And all of a sudden I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm just so embarrassed. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. And a few people started clapping and got me back in. And I'm like, oh gosh, okay, right. Of course, I was telling a deep story.
Yeah.
And the overriding feeling I had at the time was, I'm so embarrassed. This is a big cock up. And at the end, a few people walked out the door quickly. They couldn't get out of there quick enough. Absolutely. Yet I had the most important person came up and said, "Can I hug you?" And so what I realized in that moment was that they didn't think less of me. They connected more into me at that moment. And somehow, for me, stiff upper lip, part of my upbringing, I played rugby for 18 years, for God's sake. This was not how I was supposed to roll. And I certainly don't ever wish to do this with any manipulation in mind. But what it just showed is, if you just allow yourself to show your emotions, especially when it comes to what might be embarrassing emotions like that, then of course you do it with authenticity. It can lead you to be better appreciated by the people in the audience, or whoever you're leading.
Well, and I think making yourself the example and teaching these ethos in the workplace, like, something to the effect of like treating people the way you want to be treated, the old golden rule.
Yeah.
Is something I've hammered into my kids since they were little.
Nice.
And it's so important. And it's such a simple thing, but if you do practice that, then the people around you will start to practice that as well. And then you will get more of those hugs when you need them.
Absolutely. Now, of course, hugging is a funny thing.
Well,
contact and little thank yous. And so when we were at Redken, when I was at Redken, we actually had this idea of the Redken hug that I mentioned in the book. And of course, this is pre-Me Too, but we would absolutely, literally have these longer than comfortable hugs that were roughly 7 seconds long. And every, not every time, every place, of course, is, a pragmatic approach to this. But, in balance, we had these longer hugs. And the idea was, we're going to connect. And we're connecting on a very personal level. Because people make the mistake of thinking that business is all about being professional. And while, yes, of course, you need to perform, you need to do the business, it's a mistake to think that trust comes from just because you're a good professional. You also, trust and ethics are deeply personal. And so finding ways to allow for the personal elements to show up at work, each to their own, but I think is very important.
You said pre-Me Too and also pre-COVID. Now, personally, I'm a hugger, so I do like a good hug. What are your thoughts in this day and age, as far as, let's say pandemic aside, where you don't want to instill people to do this necessarily, but at the same time, I think, and I guess culturally speaking, it's different too, depending on which country you live in, right?
Yep,
so
absolutely.
like in France, I could see, or Spain especially, I could see hugs all around, where like the UK and certainly in the States, maybe not as much, Canada perhaps, depending where you are. So it's interesting culturally, but and not to keep going back to Robin Dunbar's conversation that I had with him, but he talked a lot about the studies he's done, because his history started with anthropology and studying chimps and how they communicate and how they have bonds and things, and how there is something at core, at physical touch, and it obviously doesn't have to be flirtatious or anything like that, but just a handshake or a hug or a high five or something, that physical touch that just cannot, at least not yet, be replicated in some sort of, VR world. What are your thoughts to that, in this day and age that we live in?
All right. So bottom line is permission.
Yes.
Is a key concept within this. But I'm going to go a little bit rearguard to say that I think that we absolutely need physicality. And flirtation isn't as bad as they say it is. Mm-hmm. Just like a compliment isn't necessarily an insult.
Right.
It's like, you're wearing a nice tie, Dave. I know that I'm not trying to, get warm you up or anything. I'm just complimenting you on the tie you're wearing.
Right.
And if I hug you, it doesn't mean anything more than that too. So we need to allow for the no more than that too kind of feeling, because we've gotten to the point where almost everything is being taken out of context or as a probable threat.
And now, a word from our sponsor.
Freelancing and online marketing often looks ideal from the outside, but what's inside? Many time-consuming challenges. SEMrush offers over 50 tools and reports to assist you in every step of your routine, from competitive and keyword research to link building and technical SEO. SEMrush is your digital team member. Let's hit it off. Grab your free trial today and see measurable results. Go to bit.ly/SEMrushMPN. That's bit.ly, bit.ly/SEMrushMPN.
I feel for people coming up in the new world today, where it's completely verboten to have touch. I read a book by a woman called Susan Brown Miller called The Politics of Touch. I studied at University Women's Studies, and I found it highly fascinating. So there is tact, and I mean tactile, but there's a tactful way of touching. There's an appropriate way to do it. Yet right now we're in a mode where anything is out of bounds. And so I feel like on the one hand, I want to allow for it to do it. And if it's done with an element of tact and appropriateness, hopefully we're going to come back to a place where it's allowed. Meanwhile, let's say we have pandemic. Let's say it's pas touche, as they say in French, don't touch. I think that the replacing thought, or the more powerful opportunity, is empathy. And you may not touch somebody, but if you are truly empathic with somebody, that is a feeling of warmth that I certainly feel we don't have enough of in today's world, and especially not at work.
I agree completely. I've written a fair amount about the importance of empathy, and how, at work especially, it's something that if you can't put yourself in the shoes of perhaps the person, who's administering a hug, like a genuine friendly hug, and you right away, think the worst of the situation. There's a lot to be said there, and you've written a lot about empathy in the workplace. Are there ways to be more empathetic in the workplace? Obviously there are, but what are some of the strategies you use to help, teams learn how to do this better, or at all?
Right. Well, oftentimes I'm asked, can you teach empathy? And because I wrote a book on it, and the bottom line is there are ways to teach it, but I really like to pretend that there aren't ways to teach it. You can only learn it if you want it. And let's say that the core idea with regard to empathy is observation and listening. And if you are not prone to spending the time and the concentration in silence, if you will, as opposed to thinking about me, and what I've got to do and what I've got to deliver and the messages that I want to tell you, then the chances of you being empathic are next to none. So you need to carve out the mental space and time to want to be empathic. And so if you have that predisposition, which, by the way, I think that many people don't have, but once you have that predisposition, you really want to start being more empathic and you start being more observant, well, there are ways to practice it. And one of the ways is just to speak to a stranger and listen to their story and feel what they're feeling and think about the feelings that they're having and try to lean into them because you know nothing about this person. A second example is with someone with whom you're really close, like your spouse. And instead of cutting them off or just reeling into the next thought after the thought that they've just had, why don't you repeat back what you just heard?
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing you say, Dave, is that you think it would be good to have more empathy in the business.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, wow, you're deepening in. And that issue with the spouse or with someone close is important because, especially when you're forging strong long-term relationships, we have a thing called close communication bias, where if you and I are really friends, let's say we've been, friends forever, well, the chances are I might finish off sentences you start, or vice versa. And we kind of know each other. But what happens is, what creeps in is some sort of complacency. And ultimately, what's happening is that you don't feel being heard by me. I'm just cutting you off.
Talk a little bit about the check mindset, because that kind of fits into the power of empathy.
It does indeed. So what I wanted to do, Dave, was come up with some ideas that are a little bit more than just conventional thinking. And so today we talk a lot about things like authenticity and goodness. That's absolutely relevant. But how do you actually manifest that? So in creating the idea of the check framework for leaders today, I wanted to come up with some words and some extra thoughts, if you will. So take curiosity, which is the first C of check. Yeah, being curious is really useful, yet we can't be eternally curious, because if you're constantly learning everything about everything, you end up doing nothing because you're not acting, you're just learning. So you need to figure out ways to be curious, to change your sources of information so that you're finding a breadth of information, and then also to learn to contain your curiosity, because it's easy to, I'm really curious, I love to learn, but next thing you know, you're going down 16 rabbit holes, and it's like it's a black hole, actually, not a rabbit hole, where you end up losing all your time and you're not doing what you have to do. So find ways to tap into your curiosity, change your sources, and be disciplined as to when you allow for yourself to roll down rabbit holes. That's an example. So the check mindset, that's the C. The H is humility. The E is empathy. The C stands for courage. And here it's also the courage to stand up for what you believe, which really means knowing who you are. Because if you don't know who you are, then you aren't going to go far as a leader. And then the last one is the K, and that's probably the least obvious of the 5 letters. And I'm hoping that people are listening and saying, what can the K be? Kiss? Keep it simple, stupid? Or no, it's K for karma. And that's philosophical. And as we were talking about before, I'm a fan of the Grateful Dead. And one of my 3 core values is being grateful. And within that, the idea of giving before you expect in return. And that's this idea of karma, being intentional about your giving.
Yeah. In my book, New Business Networking, I wrote a lot about the power of like what I believe in networking and in building relationships is as you're saying with karma is give, and not even with the intention of I've got to give Minter as much as possible so that way I can ask him later for the thing. But instead, I read a great book a couple years ago called The Diamond Cutter or The Diamond. I think it's The Diamond Cutter, and it's about a Buddhist monk working in the jewelry business in New York and how he transforms a jeweler, and how he talks about this. I like the way he puts it, as in he talks about karma, but he talks about it as planting seeds. And I love that idea of just planting these seeds. I love this check acronym that you have here. Part of what you talked about too is knowing what you believe in, but also making sure that the organization are all, on the same page. In the book, you wrote about Nike's decision to support Colin Kaepernick, and that was based more on culture and values than on, as you said, hardcore mathematical equations. They showed they were not afraid to stand for something, and colleagues were able to join in with that. What were your thoughts with that?
Well, I think this notion of courage is important. Mm-hmm. And the idea of standing up for something also needs to be associated with standing out. Because if you're just tapping into what everybody else is doing, some trendy acronym or some trendy hashtag, that is the opposite of courage. And it certainly won't help you stand out. In fact, it'll sort of allow you not to stand out. And so when you stand up for something, I think what's key is to do it with conviction and not be afraid to have haters. Because if what you're doing appeals to everybody, then it kind of appeals to nobody.
The people pleaser thing is interesting because that's always been one of my challenges personally is always trying to please everybody. And I once was talking to a friend and he said, "Do you have anyone hating you online?" And I said, "No, I've had a couple run-ins, but no, not really." And he's like, "Then you're not doing enough."
You're not pushing hard enough.
Right. And so the mission is I remember hearing this idea of for people pleasers, this exercise. I've never actually done it, so I can't comment, but that you go to like a busy coffee shop, like a Starbucks in the States or something, right? With a huge line, or not just in the States, they're everywhere, but you stand in line, and when it gets to your turn and you have a line of people waiting behind you, you just, and you take your time intentionally as an exercise for a people pleaser to kind of overcome.
To start having haters.
To start having haters. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, presumably right after that you pay it forward for the next person. So you feel like your guilt is assuaged.
I've worked in customer service too many times. I've worked in restaurants and things like that over the years. And yeah, to me, it's always been like, I couldn't do it because I couldn't make the poor barista feel uncomfortable too. I just don't have it in me.
I had a wonderful chat with Jim Knight, who
I love Jim.
Yeah, good. There you go. Yeah. So we were talking about his work at the Hard Rock Cafe.
Yeah.
And some people might come over and say, "Hey, listen, can you turn the music down? I can't hear my neighbor." And they said, "Well, sorry, you're at the Hard Rock Cafe. That's why people come. And no, we can't turn the music down."
Yeah.
And sometimes you just got to know how to refuse a customer.
Yes, actually, one of my favorite examples of this too is, and I love Jim, by the way, he's awesome.
Cool.
the Alamo Drafthouse Cinema in Austin, Texas.
Oh, I've been there many times.
Have you been there? Do you know the story?
Course.
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to drop a link in the show notes because there's a YouTube clip of this for everybody. But long story short, they are such a dedicated, I'm a big movie nerd and I hate people that take out their phones in the theater. And so, but somebody called and complained about being thrown out and they were dropping F-bombs and stuff on their machine or recording. And they use that recording now as the reminder to turn off your phones, which I thought was absolutely brilliant.
Well, whenever I go to South by for the cinema piece,
yes, movies,
they always have a quirky film to begin with, which reminds people to turn off your fucking phones and focus on being here, be present with what we're about to do. This is art.
God forbid you be present, right?
Mm-hmm. I've had, by the way, some of the most remarkable experiences in Austin, Texas at the South by event. And I used to go, and as being back in the ideas physical world, I just, there's nothing. There are places that physical world. And I have another friend, Natalie Nahai, who's written a book about how to compensate in a digital first virtual world for the lack of physicality. And I think it's a big question. And I think while we think we can intellectually get over it, I think we need to keep on wishing to smell each other, to feel each other's heartbeat. I think that's really important for our humanity and our sense of self, to be able to have that physicality. And so I keep on wishing for that. I think that we need to fight for that, even if it's at the risk of certain health elements, even as at the risk, and here's a big risk, of offending people. I think we do feel, I think that humanity, that handshake, that hug, that feeling in someone's presence is irreplaceable.
So in your book, you mentioned Peter Drucker's famous quote, which I love, which is "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." So what are some culture building tips that you've come across in this new hybrid work age when we're being forced to, my own thinking on this is that for the most part, most businesses are going to either switch eventually to all back in person, or more likely they're going to have some sort of hybrid. I know Google's doing this now, and I think some other big tech giants are doing this as well, with like a 3-day in the office, 2-day hybrid for work from home kind of deal. What are your thoughts on building strong cultures and relationships when it's more of a hybrid model?
All right, so let's start with hybrid. And I think that this is a ticking time bomb. I think that hybrid is a lovely word, but the issue is that it's a choice. Whereas we've been mandated lockdowns, and in the old days we used to mandate to go to the office. Now you're giving everybody a choice, and I think that is a real issue that people have not registered as to how they're going to manage that in the future. I think it's democracy is a very messy thing, and hybrid is, by the fact of it being a choice, is also going to be extremely messy and difficult to manage, especially for legacy businesses. When it comes to culture, this is the key point for me, Dave, which is that you need to make your employees your number one fans. And so I remember a CEO I was working with who said, when I was doing an event for his staff, and I said, wouldn't it be great if you did a video that welcomed everybody, and I'd show your video at the beginning of all my sessions. And I was doing it for them in something like 25 different countries. And so I was representing the CEO. And he said, what do you mean? What should I say? And I said, well, you can say thank you for all the hard work you do. He said, what? No, they should be thanking me. And Houston, we got a problem.
Right.
And so the point I feel is that a lot of companies are getting all excited about customer centricity, customer experience. Sure, customer pays, customer's king, blah, blah, blah. However, frankly, we should be spending a lot more time thinking about the employee experience, the values as to how they are treated and how they feel, because they are the ones who are delivering the experience to the customers. And I feel like in terms of maturity, so many companies have made the customer the big thing, but actually the next level, the far deeper, stronger level, is when your internal culture is so strong and aligned with the way you wish to deliver an experience for your customers. So you really need to think deeply about how your employees feel about you. I didn't come up with this first, and I can't remember her name, but I wasn't the first person to come up with this idea. But think about whether you might want to have a brand tattoo test. And what does that mean? How many of your employees would wish to have a permanent fixture on their skin of your company, your brand, such that even though we know whether or not they die or leave, they'd be happy to have a piece of real estate on their skin that represents your brand. And that, for me, is the movement that I think needs to happen in companies. That's really what's behind that idea that culture eats strategy for breakfast, where your culture is your new marketing, where your people are your number one fans, because they are the ones that are delivering the customer experience.
And you wrote that if individuals don't feel recognized, they flee, which is definitely something I've seen. What are some ways that you recommend leaders recognize their people?
Well, frankly, hey, Dave, thank you for doing that specific thing that you did for me last week. So the little thank yous here and there, dropping a handwritten note on the desk of somebody.
Yes.
Rewarding people. These are wonderful ways. A second important way, when you ask for people's advice, heed it, recognize it, give feedback as to if it went or didn't go down. I love the example of how Starbucks, when they had my Starbucks idea, they asked, let me go back. Sorry. How many times have you been asked, Dave, for advice, for example, at the canteen at your company? God forbid you still work at a company where they have canteens, but the canteen would often have these little cards, listen, give us your feedback on what you think of the food at the canteen.
Yeah.
So you get the card, you write out, well, I think that the spinach could be better or this and that, whatever, you write it in. And then how many times did anyone ever write back to you, Dave, and say, thank you for your wonderful advice on the spinach. We've taken it to heart. However, we don't think we can change it. Or thank you for that. We've decided to add spinach or whatever, blah, 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 to the menu. I'm thinking nothing ever comes back, which is generally the feeling for the majority of times that customers spend time filling in these surveys and so on and so forth, much less employees. And so I think of the Starbucks who have a few more customers than most companies have employees. And they were able, in their My Starbucks idea, to return to all the feedback and say, hey, listen, yours is either green, orange, or red. We took your idea, we explored it, we didn't like it. We took your idea and we're going forward. Thank you. That is an example of giving feedback to the feedback. And there's an example of feeling like you're being heard.
I love that idea. Was that an internal dashboard that they could refer back to see sort of the status?
So for Starbucks, it was part of their website. And so if you had an idea, you could submit it to Starbucks as a regular Starbucks punter where you're drinking their coffee and you're like, oh, listen, it'd be great. You know, for example, that's how they came up with a little plug for the cap on top, which had a little hole where you put it between your lap, but when you're driving and you pick it up and you can drink from the cap with the little hole. But sometimes you put that in your lap and you're not ready to drink it. So someone suggested, hey, listen, could you just provide me with a little dongle that sort of fits in that hole so it doesn't spill in my lap? And that was through my Starbucks idea, just to give you an example.
That's brilliant. I love that. So one thing that you also talk about in the book, and I know I've got to be mindful of your time here, so I want to be respectful.
All good. All good, Dave.
Yeah. So one thing that you talked about was developing your employee or your team members' personal brands and sort of embracing, their own personal brand visions and defining maybe their own goals and things like that. Do you have any tips for that or exercises you do?
Well, there are many, so it's a little bit hard to unpack fully. But the first thought within that is that a personal brand is best when it's aligned with who you are. So as an organization, to what extent do you allow people to know, much less express, who they are? And so the exercise of personal branding is awfully interesting because it really is hopefully an invitation for people to become more fulfilled and understand who they are at a personal level. Once they have that, then they're better able, with more integrity and authenticity, to express themselves publicly. And if you can be the kind of company that allows your employees to know who they are better, well, you're creating a tremendous legacy and probably a type of brand that employees would want to tattoo themselves with. So that's the real thought underneath that. And afterwards, the idea is that if you give your employees the agency to express themselves, you treat them like adults and you don't give them 100,000 rules as to what they should and shouldn't do, as if they were at school still, then you give them that feeling of autonomy and agency, then hopefully you will be paid off. I mean, on balance, the vast majority of people will do things in a good way because they have good intentions. And of course, you're going to have the few naysayers and the silly experiences. But on balance, you'll be remunerated or rewarded for allowing your employees to feel fulfilled, expand who they are, create a personal reputation branding such that when they leave, they have an ongoing career, because you don't want them to leave and then suffer.
Right. Yeah. It's all about supporting your team members. And then when and understanding that people do leave and rather than, being all upset when they leave, instead give them everything they need to leave well and with dignity. So that way, you're not burning bridges, getting back to that whole networking thing, right?
Absolutely. And the bridges story is interesting because I, like you, am someone who generally has always wanted to please people. Yeah. My mantra and maybe my own personal mission, part of it is to connect people. And so I'm always in the spirit of wanting to connect people. So whenever I'm pissing people off, I don't feel like that's part of my building bridges story. In the end of the day, the person who leaves very well could be leaving for reasons other than wanting to leave. Maybe they have to, or they have a boss or a particular issue that they can't deal with. And maybe they'll come back. And otherwise, in any event, they're going to spend the rest of their lives talking about the time they worked at your company. And that otherwise is called word of mouth.
Yes. Yes. I have a keynote I do called the ROI of NICE, which is based on the NICE methodology that I do. And I was delivering this at a conference recently, and I actually wrote a blog post about this because three people at the end pulled me aside individually and privately talked to me about naming names. They named their old boss and what a jerk he was or she was, and the company they worked for and how they didn't care and all these things. And they were they were livid with these people. And like, I was just thinking to myself how, as you just said, like the legacy that you're leaving for your brand when people are this frustrated and upset is just, yeah, it can be horrendous. So it's so important to not burn those bridges. All right, I'm going to move on to the lightning round. So here we go. Complete this sentence. Nice guys and gals finish
together.
Oh, I like that. What's a nice book you recommend to the nice makers?
Lost Connections by Johann Hari.
Ooh, I haven't read
Great.
that.
It's a phenomenal book talking about a man who is a journalist who still, according to him, is depressed, but rather than seek the medication, has looked for other ways to heal himself that are through 7 different ways to connect, including with nature, with yourself, with friends. And I think it's a healthier approach to life, and we could all do with more connection.
Absolutely. I struggled with loneliness and borderline depression and certainly anxiety. During actually about this time last year, I was not in the best of spirits, and
sorry.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, it was great because I talked to a therapist and I started really focusing on meditation and mindfulness and have come out on the other end much stronger, but also much clearer on focusing, sort of less on the past, which can lead to depression, and less on the future, which can lead to anxiety, and rather be more present and enjoy nature and enjoy friends. And so, you're spot on there. How is Minter nice to himself?
Well, I have 3 ways every day that I try to be nice to myself. And the first is a routine of meditation and stretching. So I'm 57 years old, and I kiss my calves every day, which is a long way down, but I get there. And I want to feel my body. I feel my sensations. And I also have a practice of gratitude every morning. The second thing I do pretty much every day is sports. And the sport that I play, you and most of your listeners, I'm going to think, do not know it. It's called padel. So that's with a Spanish accent to be different from paddle tennis.
Right.
It's padel. And Padel, I play this game and it makes me feel like a total youngster. Well, because I'm playing with young people usually. If you go check out World Paddle Tour, it's the most entertaining sport to watch, probably equally fun to play. And the third thing I do is play music. Every day I get my guitar out and play 30 minutes of music.
Tell me a little bit about the gratitude that you do daily. Is there an exercise you do, or is this a journaling thing?
It's just I think about for what I'm grateful, and I come up with 3 different things, and they can be very small things.
Yeah.
But I generally want to have one big thing, and then 2 small things that I can think about. Hey, I'm grateful for, and I literally spend 30 to 60 seconds on it. I come up with it. I don't feel like I need to go into deeper context. I just, that's right. And sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're different, but it gets me into a good spirit.
Yeah. I spoke with Jeffrey Shaw on the podcast a while back, and Jeff's great. And he recommended something I've stolen for myself, which is a what's going right journal, where you begin each entry with what's going right. And then you can, whatever you could share whatever you feel in your personal journal, but just starting with what's going right is in a way, because I've tried being like thankfulness journals or gratefulness journals, but I found that, I would repeat the same thing too many times writing it. And instead what's going right some days takes me a minute to think, what is going right? And then I start realizing, oh, wait, this is going really well. This is going well. Hey, things are pretty good. So I found that exercise to be helpful as well.
Nice.
If you had a billboard, what would it say?
When you get confused, listen to the music play.
Ooh, I like that. That's awesome. Well, it is.
That's a steal. That's a steal. I didn't write that.
That's okay. That's okay. We'll quote you anyway.
It's from the Grateful Dead.
Yes. But of course. Well, I want to say thank you so much. How can people get a hold of you? How can they learn more about you?
Well, I have a miraculously curious, weird, Google-friendly name, minterdial.com. I have a newsletter I publish every other week that tries to be uplifting and elevate the spirits. And my podcast is called Minter Dialogue, and I have a few books that are out there. And if anyone's looking for a meaningful half-hour experience and likes history, especially World War II, I do recommend taking a little gander at my film, The Last Ring Home. It's a PBS film, and it'll be meaningful for me if anyone gets a chance to see it, to drop me a line, connect with me about it, because it's one of the most important things in my life, which is to remember how much we owe this generation for having given us the freedoms we have and the luck that we have to live in this magnificent world that we have today. And this is what how I spend my life. I try to honor that spirit pretty much every day.
Yeah, that's fantastic. During and I haven't seen it, but I intend to watch it. So that is thank you for pointing that out. It brings back a memory during 9/11 when I was in Toronto, and that morning, of course, the country went on lockdown like many, and my mom called me and was very upset, of course. But as the day went on, it was clear that the attacks had ended and also that nothing had happened in Canada. And so chances were pretty slim at that point that anything was going to happen. And yet my mom, who's British and in Canada at the time, was quite upset, of course. And I'm trying to calm her down just to let her know, hey, it's okay. It's not happening here, type of thing. And at that point she said, Dave, you don't understand. I grew up during the Blitz. And I had never really thought fully about the experience of growing up in London during the Blitz, with your, neighborhoods in ruins around her and just the chaos of that. And so I do encourage everybody to watch that, and I definitely plan to as well.
In the realm of, well, first of all, that particular week was obviously important to me. I was running Redken, based in Manhattan, overlooking the Twin Towers in my office.
Yes.
And so I write about that.
Yes,
it's a pretty big deal for me.
Yeah.
And I want to finish perhaps with a little story that now that you've talked about Blitz. So obviously the Blitz is happening in London in the Second World War. One of my neighbors who I met for the first time about 18 months ago, her name is Doris. And I saw her in the garden just below in our building complex. And she was sitting there. It was a lovely spring afternoon. And I sort of tipped my head as I'm walking by her. This is pandemic, lockdown period. And I say, "Good day, ma'am." And she said, "What?" I said, "Well, good day, ma'am," I try to say loudly. She says, "Come over here." I said, "Well, I'm sorry, but I'm not supposed to." She says, "Sit down." And so, and with a little bit of charm. And so I sit down beside her on the bench. And so, what did you want to say? I said, "Well, I was just wishing you a good day." She says, and she says, "Well, people have gone crazy around here." I says, "Explain." And she said, "Well, I live alone. I'm 97 years old, and people are, I'm isolated. Listen, I'd rather die living than live dead." And she said, "When I was 18 years old, it was 1942. I married a man. He went to the front. I signed up for the army. I served in communications, and I worked 18-hour days. And then one day I came home and my house had been bombed And so with my father and mum, with whom I lived, we ended up having to move to the tube station. At that point, my father, who had a lung condition, died. And then we continued on through the rationing and the situation. And when my husband came home, he was a different man. Yeah, those days were difficult. This is nothing. Please. I wish you would keep me company. And so Doris and I stayed, I would see her every week. I'd go to her place and I'd give her some cake or something like this, despite the fact that I was supposed to, recognize isolation and all that. And I wasn't being silly about it, but it's just about putting perspective on what hardship is. And so for those who live through true hardship, I think it's worthwhile remembering that most of us haven't had shit for problems. I mean, of course, there are people who are listening who have problems, and I don't want to belittle that. Yep. But let's put perspective on our stub toe and think about how life is so much more pleasant than it was for so many people who did so much and sacrificed a lot more than we did. Yeah. Doris died about 6 months ago. And of course I went to her memorial service. And frankly, at the end she was saying, well, oh darn, I'm still alive. She was waiting to die. But we are in a country, in a civilization where we're afraid to talk about death. We're afraid about death in general. We should recognize our mortality and be all the more grateful for every day that we live.
100%.
There.
Yes, 100%. Well, I hope we all run with that idea, because I am definitely on board. So, well, Mentor, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me on the show, and let's keep in touch.
Indeed, Dave. Lovely. Thank you for having me on the show. Appreciate it very much. And big salutations. Look forward to hanging out with you in Nashville one day.
Thanks for listening to the Nice Podcast. I'm Dave Delaney, and you can get in touch with me at Futureforth.com. We want to be able to hear from you, so I want to include your voice on an upcoming episode. To do this, record a voice comment or share a question at nicepodcast.co. There you will also find a listener survey, and you can share how we're doing and your feedback with us there too. And if you like what we're doing here, please be sure to follow and subscribe to the show. And of course, your ratings and reviews are very much appreciated. Thank you for this. Our theme music is by Alistair Crystal, who you can hear more from at alistaircrystal.ca. All right, thanks for being here, and we will see you next time. Be nice.